Anyone familiar with Old Testament history knows that national Israel tended to be rebellious against God and his purposes. Consequently, they did not show God's true nature and goodness to surrounding nations. But Israel's idolatrous culture and the covenant curses they received for their rebellion made God look bad, as Paul noted in Romans 2.
For, as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you.
Well, I'm afraid that the same thing happened during this age, as biblical Christianity was legalized and employed in an attempt to preserve the dying Roman Empire, and was then increasingly reshaped, or distorted, within European culture. We call it Christendom. When people claim to hate God and Christianity, I have found that many do not actually hate the biblical Christianity that many continue to be drawn to. What they dislike is Christendom, a cultural corruption of biblical Christianity that developed in Europe between 400 and 1800 AD. Another common complaint I would trace to the Calvinistic concept of God as so totally sovereign that he actually controls everything that happens, which then causes people to rightly wonder, if God is good and controls everything, then why does so much evil exist and continue? It would be very appropriate to ask, where did this distorted stuff come from? Biblical Christianity attracted thousands as it spread and even thrived during the era of persecution from 30 to 313 AD. But the first reason as to why Christianity appears to be declining in Western civilization is that after 400 AD, Christianity was blended with the dying Roman Empire, and that experiment, Christendom, got seriously off track over the centuries. In the early 4th century, the Roman emperors Constantine and later Theodosius I moved Christianity from persecuted minority to state religion by legalizing and favoring it with legislation and then closing the pagan temples. They wanted to harness Christianity's strength to work in harmony with Roman government to salvage a declining empire. Accordingly, they encouraged retooling Christianity into a theocracy, where religion, government, and culture are blended. Since the New Covenant was not a theocracy, theologians increasingly went back to the Old Testament and the Sinai Covenant for inspiration, since that was a national theocracy. This is why believers' baptism became infant sprinkling and confirmation, based on Jewish infant circumcision and bar mitzvah. The priesthood of all believers, with special servants, was retooled into a mystically empowered robed clergy, modeled after the Levitical priesthood. Large cathedrals were built, modeled after the tabernacle and temple, with a larger laity section and a smaller altar section divided with a fence and restricted to the ordained priesthood, where Christ was weekly re-sacrificed in the Mass. David's divine right to the throne of Israel was adopted and applied to all Christian dynastic monarchies. Over time, the churches shifted to the organizational structure of the Roman Empire, with individual congregations under a single priest, regional congregations grouped under an archbishop or cardinal, and these guys met in Rome like the old Roman Senate. The bishop of the church in Rome was gradually elevated, like the Caesars, to the rank of Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Roman religion. Because the preservation of the empire was a primary concern, and theological unity was believed to be required for political unity, after 313 AD, emperors convened councils to deal with theological issues that might threaten the unity of the empire. Power and money often lead to corruption, and the 10th century papacy was pretty bad. High offices were bought and sold by powerful Italian families, Forged decretals appeared claiming the papacy and papal states had been authorized by the Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century, and for a period of time there was even a brothel in the Vatican. Disgusted, the Eastern Church, centered in Constantinople, separated from Rome in 1054. Between 900 and 1200 AD, Catholic scholars seeking more detailed explanations for certain elements of nature than the Bible provided rediscovered the Greek philosophers, especially Plato and Aristotle, and blended some of their ideas with biblical teaching. This is how the idea of the earth fixed at the center of the universe, and biology with totally fixed species with no variations from the beginning, came to be widespread beliefs in European Christian thought. While later critics would ridicule the Bible for scientific inaccuracies, Copernicus, Galileo, and Darwin were really objecting to ideas that had been borrowed from Plato and Aristotle. Between 1095 and 1270, 7 crusades were fought with the primary goal of reopening Palestine from Islamic control to allow European Catholics to make pilgrimages to holy sites. However, Crusade number 4 targeted Constantinople in an attempt to forcibly bring the Eastern Church back into the Roman fold. By 1200, the papacy reached its most powerful point when Pope Innocent III declared himself to be the vicar, one who stands in the place of God and Christ, and claimed to be ruler of the world, ruler of the church, ruler of church councils, and the judge of all political affairs. Still assuming that theological unity was essential for political unity, the Roman Church defined its theology as orthodoxy, right opinion. Ideas defined as dogma were beliefs that all were to embrace without question. To suppress heresy, wrong opinion, Innocent called and dominated the Fourth Lateran Council for several purposes, one of which was to institute the Inquisition. The Inquisition ran from 1231 to 1800 in 3 segments, persecuting doctrinal heresy, witchcraft, and insincere Jewish converts to Catholicism in Spain, sometimes using torture and execution. As the French monarchy was pulling away from Rome, the papal court tried to maintain its influence by moving from Rome to a palace on the French border at Avignon from 1305 to 1378. However, the people of Rome wanted the papacy to move back, and when the last Avignon pope died in Rome, the next one had to be elected in Rome, and pressure was applied to make sure that an Italian was elected. Well, that occurred, but immediately the new Italian pope started trash-talking French cardinals, who departed and reconvened in France to elect another pope, which resulted in 2 popes, cursing each other and their followers. In trying to depose them, a third was elected, but neither of the other 2 would step down, so for almost 40 years the Roman Church had 2 and then 3 popes, cursing each other and their followers. Everybody in Europe knew something needed to be done. The Council of Constance met from 1414 to 1418, with the Holy Roman Emperor helping to round up and depose all 3 popes and elect a new one. After promising him safe passage to the council, the popular reformer John Huss was arrested and burned at the stake. Reformers had been appearing since the 1100s, and all emphasized a return to the Bible for spiritual guidance. Their popularity grew as they encouraged their disciples to visit villages and actually teach the Bible to the common people. Wycliffe focused on translating the Bible into English so every plowboy could read it for himself. Rome attempted to silence them, but by 1500, new reformers arose who were supported and protected by nobles who had their own armies, were tired of Roman taxation and were ready to break with Rome. Rome was not willing to easily surrender spiritual control over Europe or all of the tax money which came in annually. So armies were sent out to stop the revolts, but now they were met by local armies ready for freedom from Rome. Europe experienced 150 years of strife and warfare. While 16th century reformers tried to move back toward the Bible, local politics was often blended in, and their own various philosophical theologies differed enough that they often wound up as much at odds with other reformers as with the Catholic Church. Luther and Zwingli discussed the Lord's Supper and agreed on 15 out of 16 points, but that one point was enough that Luther would not even shake hands with Zwingli when they parted. In some areas, Calvinists hated Anabaptists enough that they would immerse them until they stopped breathing. We call it drowning. Well, why was there so much hostility and brutality associated with Christianity in Europe? Well, the roots go back in history to the expansion of the Roman Empire. As it conquered many areas with different gods and religious systems, philosophers and leaders concluded that all of the local gods would need to be honored by all for the harmony of the empire. Political unity requires spiritual or religious unity. The assumption: the gods exist and expect to be honored. The reasoning: if honored, they would bless Roman rule. If not, they would be upset, curse Roman rule, and cause problems for the empire. The conclusion: all must outwardly honor all of the official gods of Rome for the harmony of the empire. This is why Rome persecuted Christians. They refused to honor the gods of Rome. After Constantine and Theodosius legalized Christianity and made it the new state religion of Rome, as power became concentrated in the papacy and Christianity was being transformed into a theocracy, the idea continued in the belief that all needed to be faithful to Catholic teaching for the good of Christendom, the Christian Roman Empire. As theologians were encouraged to retool Christianity into a theocracy, using Sinai Covenant Israel as a model, it was easy to carry over the Mosaic requirement that false prophets, those promoting other gods, and lawbreakers were to be killed, justifying the suppression of heresy with harsh methods. When Reformation groups broke with Rome, and then splintered within, the same mentality continued, enforcing moral and theological unity in each area with harsh measures, such as imprisonment, beatings, mutilation, banishment, and execution. In France, there were times when whoever held power, Catholics or Protestants, would take the children away from the minority view parents so they are not raised to be heretics. By 1648, everybody was worn out, and the Peace of Westphalia ended the warfare, and each area settled down a bit with whatever religious view was dominant in the area. With all that Europeans had observed within Christendom during the previous centuries, papal corruption, the Inquisition, the Crusades, papal schism, Reformation wars, brutality against anyone not following your group's view of morality and theology, and Calvinism's portrayal of God as totally sovereign in the sense of being the direct cause or willing accomplice to continuing evil. So in the later 1600s, skeptical intellectuals began appearing in France and then elsewhere, expressing that they had had enough and wanted to see all of this come to an end. The problem was that they did not try to distinguish biblical Christianity from the distortions of Christendom, but blamed God and the Bible as the cause of it all. The next big movement would be based on hostility against the Judeo-Christian worldview, as secularists believed eliminating God and the Bible would pave the way for an enlightened and peaceful New France and Europe.